aware of how this was intending to be continued. And of course, by the time we get to the Arab Spring in late 2010, 2011, the worry again for the West here is that two of the governments in the region, in Tunisia and Egypt, which had very much been poster boys for this plan, this master plan, had fallen to the wayside as it was increasingly clear that inequalities in societies had, if anything, grown as the economic liberalisation had been ramped up. Mubarak's son, Gamal, had been flogging off state assets with all the cronies and the military involved, etc. Much the same in Tunisia, with the elite and the family members connected to Ben Ali and his wife. Turning to grassroots movements, I think it's always difficult when we talk about politics of intervention that there's a danger to be too deterministic about this and to sideline the role of regional agencies. I think it's important if we take Egypt, for example, that to bear in mind that the Arab Spring didn't just come out of nowhere. We had, of course, a decade or more of protests preceding that. We had textile industry workers' strikes, trade unions taken to the streets. We had the so-called enough movement. We've had enough movement in Egypt too. We had the 2009 so-called Green Revolution in Iran as well, where hundreds of thousands again took to the streets. So we had many occasions before the Arab Spring of people taking their matters into their own hands before it finally bubbled over the top at some point in late 2010. However, the point I think to make here is that we don't know the direction these movements would have been able to take in the wake of 2011 if they had been left unchecked and unchallenged, not only by the Western powers, but by the allies of those Western powers in the region. To put it this way, what would Egypt look like today if Qatar, and then following on from that, Saudi Arabia and UAE had not got stuck into Egypt? The answer simply is we don't know what Egypt would have looked like. In Tunisia's case, the same could be said about the security state that is forming there at the moment and entering into a closer relationship with NATO than even Ben Ali ever did. As for elsewhere in the Middle East, we could look at Yemen, for example, where what seemed to be a full-blown revolution in 2011 and 2012 began to fall to the wayside after the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, became let's say, the front movers for the United Nations in sponsoring a transition plan, which of course is now very much lying in tatters and has led to a full-blown military intervention by Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and with the de facto blessing of the Western powers too. Any other questions? Gentleman at the back.
Yeah, I think that with your answer to Gary's question, there's a very strong narrative around which basically argues that most or many of the developments in the Middle East are fueled by petrodollars. And in all your answers, you keep referring back to that. Not simplistically, but through many caveats. And this is why I think the question of the Iranian Revolution is quite interesting. Because if the Iranian Revolution happened, what was the role of Saudi Arabia and Qatar? So either you have to conclude that the Iranian Revolution wasn't a disruption or was taken over. What was their influence? It seems to me what is happening in this account is not simply the fact that there is no kind of refuge to grassroots, but actually no historical sensibility at all. There is no kind of sensibility. It's simply a game of risk, where the West continuously carries out policies almost like a brochure, frivolous brochure, and nothing comes of it. And I don't think in any sense that there are actually other agents involved. And even with the so-called West, you can't argue there's a continuity going on there. And that there are those transformations. which really disrupt this account of being simply a retreat from all these kind of, let's say, for example, we talk about Afghanistan and we talk about CIA as one of the biggest operations, which is absolutely true. But it would be also worth mentioning that the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was actually one of the biggest Soviet operations since the Second World War. And there wasn't just that the CIA was doing all this. There was also Soviet troops involved there, 150,000 at some point. So I think it's just a question of getting sort of balance right. Are we really dealing with a game of risk, or are we actually talking about historical transformations in which agencies and agents are changed through the kind of process, rather than simply being static?
Okay, I think as bearish as it sounds, I think we're very much I would very much be in the former camp. If we take Afghanistan, for example, your Soviet invasion is my Soviet intervention. We now know from the declassified documents that back in the more than 4 months before the Soviet Union intervened on behalf of the PDP, US officials were already discussing ways to get the Soviet Union to intervene to create their version of Vietnam, in Brzezinski's words. So very much this was according to plan. The Soviet Union fell for it. Putin, of course, today hasn't thoroughly fallen for it in Syria. He's being very careful in his extent of engagement. With regards to the Iranian Revolution, again, I think the Iranian Revolution, of course, very much disrupted at the time what was arguably the loyalist and the most loyal and most important client of the United States in the region. But the ability of the White House to roll with that and run with that is incredible. We now know that the Republican campaign team, before having even won the election, had already reached out to the Islamic Republic. We know George Bush Sr., while on his way to becoming vice president, was already engaging with Iranian officials. We know, of course, and I'm sorry to bring this up in polite company, how Iran and other powers in the region, of course, were involved in helping fund the Nicaragua campaign in the 1980s too, the so-called Iran-Contra scandal. Iran needed the US weapons, and the funding from that ended up in the hands of the CIA-backed Contras against the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. Any other question?
I think we've got 2 minutes or
Yeah.
so left. Can I ask a very simple question? That's about the ability of Western media to explain all of these very complex processes and movements, because speaking as a layman, it seems that they are hopelessly inadequate to explain a tiny portion of what's going on.
Yes, I think. I greatly sympathise with